is it possible shaman, female? What's going on here?
Okay. I think there are quite a few female shamans. We call them shamans. That's why I hesitated. Shamans. It doesn't really matter.
That's okay. I'm from America. I'm going to shape up here. Shaman.
No, it doesn't. I think either or is fine. But what tends to happen is there is this confusion over the second part of the word, the second syllable of man. People think shaman or shaman means a man, but actually it's a Siberian word for someone who journeys into other dimensions and gets guidance and information from the spirits that he or she meets in those dimensions, and then brings them back here into this dimension for their tribe and their community. And that can be a male or female. And when we research into archaeology, as more and more we're doing now, looking at rock art and that sort of thing, we're realizing that more and more women were shamans, to the point that practically most of them at one time, we're talking tens of thousands of years ago, just after the last ice age, they were women. And then there was this gradual, over thousands of years, this sort of patriarchy came in, and religion, and that's a whole other story. So shaman is a Siberian word, and the plural of shaman is shamans, because man is not male. It means something else.
I had no idea the word comes from Siberia. I don't think most people, when they hear it, they don't know that.
Yeah.
I think they assume just Native American Indians from the land of the United States or something like that.
Yes, although I think they're finding out now genetically many of those their ancestors were from Siberia, around a place called Lake Baikal in Siberia. A lot of them came from there. But the shamans were all over the world at one time. I'm talking about probably, it was kind of driven underground at different times, and probably it was really, the death knell, I'd say, was Christianity, where they trashed the mystery groves in Greece. There used to be these things called the mystery teachings and the mystery rites, where people would go for a kind of shamanic initiation, because Plato was a shaman, and so was Socrates.
See, we didn't know that.
Not many people do. It's only nerds like me.
How did you know? How do you know that?
It's just I've been studying it for so long. I know this completely inconsequential information. I'm going to trot it all out now. No, but apparently Socrates used to stand on one leg in trance to talk to the spirits. And then he trained Plato. Plato trained Aristotle, but he didn't train him in the mystery rites and the mystery teachings. So Aristotle has a much more, rational, logical approach. He has that whole mystery thing missing. And that's where you start to see it fading out of civilization. But it was really dealt a huge death knell by the Caesars from the 3rd, 4th century onwards, who wanted to bring in Christianity to solidify the empire as a belief system. I mean, most of those remained pagan, but they brought it in so that it would bring the empire together, and it was enforced at the point of a sword. You know, you either converted or you died a horrible death.
Terrible death.
And there were, at that time, we call them now Gnostic Christians. I'm talking now about 400 AD in Rome. There were lots of different philosophy schools of different people that we now would call Gnostic Christian, who understood the Jesus stories as allegories, as metaphors, as myth. And they were the Christians that were fed to the lions.
Wow. You were an alternative health researcher and journalist, and you had worked for the Sunday Times and the Express. And I'd like you to share how the transition was from doing that work to moving into the work you're into today.
Yes, it's just such a huge, I'm trying to think the best way to explain it. I was always interested in alternative health, but more from the mind, body, spirit, the spirit bit of the mind, body, spirit spectrum, because I understood that very early on that we are spirits in a human body, and that if the spirit was sick, then the body would be sick. And it was very difficult to write that kind of an article for the Sunday Times, for instance, at that time. I think it even would be difficult now. But we are in a different age now, but it was even more impossible then. And so I concentrated on the usual therapies that, again, were new at that time to that audience, like acupuncture and aromatherapy, homeopathy, those sorts of therapies. And so I would write about those, and I'd go to interview people that had these therapies and, got their kind of case history of how they'd got on with the therapy, with their different health conditions that they had. And I did that as well for the Sunday Express after I left the Sunday Times. But I kind of reached a midlife crisis period about the age of 45, mid-40s, the usual time that you get this. And I just realized that my life felt so superficial, and I wasn't going deep enough, and all the things that you often feel when you're going through that crisis. So that's when I went to India, and I stayed in Sai Baba's ashram for 6 months initially, the first time, which was just wonderful. And that's where the book Lord of the Dance, after I came back, I wrote that book. But I didn't want to go back into journalism. So for a while, I was just doing jobbing editing for people.
Editing articles or books or
whatever anybody wanted editing. I was a freelancer, so I was just really basically trying to earn money so that I could go on retreats and do more shamanic stuff. And not shamanic at that time. I met some shamans in India at Sai Baba's ashram, but I still didn't know that was the path for me. So I was still trying lots of different spiritual paths. The funny thing was, Sai Baba said to the Western devotees, you should go back to your own country. I'm not trying to turn people, when you go back to your own country, he wasn't like banishing us or anything, but when you go back, you need to find the roots of your own religion, because, this is where your strength will come from. And I took that to mean Christianity, which of course isn't our own religion. It was an import. It's a Middle East import. But that's how I know so much about the beginnings of Christianity. That's what I was researching at that time. So basically I was going out to earn as much. You could earn quite a lot of money in London, sometimes £300 a day you could earn just doing some copywriting for an ad agency or whatever. So I just work like for a couple of weeks, and then I do research for a couple of weeks and then go back to work again. And it was just a way of supporting myself. I was trying to find the roots of our religion, Christianity. And I followed it all the way back into, went to Jerusalem, realized there's no historic evidence for anyone called Jesus. So I just kept going, got to Zoroaster, finally ended up in India. So I thought, okay, I've gone wrong somewhere. It's taken me 2 years to get back to India. So it isn't Christianity. And then it was only after I moved here that I started to connect with the whole Celtic mythology and understanding about getting to know the spirits of the land here. And I was trained as a shaman during all of that. Went to be trained as a shaman, finally got the message I needed to be a shaman. And then I moved here from Kent. This is Somerset. It's completely different here. The spirits of the land here are completely different, as they are wherever you go. But I found with them they have taught me to get in touch with the kind of Celtic mythos, the myths that underlie the stories of this land. And in doing that, I'm understanding that in that way we will root ourselves into the land, and that's where the sovereignty comes from. People talk about sovereignty a lot these days, as it's almost like a political thing, claiming my sovereignty. I'm going to claim my sovereignty.
And legally, in the lawful context.
Yeah, like lawful rebellion and lawful dissent and freemen of the land. There's lots of different groups, and they're doing good work, and I totally support them. But my understanding is that the sovereignty of the land actually comes from the land, and that the kings of old used to know this, and how they would get the sovereignty of the land, how it would be transmitted to them as a spiritual transmission, was through the high priestess of the temple, or someone known as a hierodule, which is a sacred prostitute, but it's not a prostitute like we would think of a prostitute. I mean, she was highly revered because she was very sacred, very holy. And she would sleep with the king or the pharaoh in Egypt on the night of his coronation, and therefore pass the sovereignty of the land. It would come through her like a conduit, because she was a kind of shaman. So that's why I wrote the Sacred Sex Rites of Ishtar, because this is a whole missing piece of the jigsaw that we don't have. That this isn't, I think it was practiced that way for a long time. It was certainly known about for a long time. Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream is actually a whole allegory on that. So obviously he, or whoever Shakespeare was, knew about that. But I think it probably stopped around that time, probably around Elizabethan times, because I'm not at all aware that the recent royal families go through that process. What if they do? They don't tell us about it. But you do hear little glimpses of things. You know, there's something in the Vedic times. It was called the horse sacrifice. It was called the Maituna. No horses was actually sacrificed, but it was a play about a horse sacrifice, and they would use a mock-up horse to do it. And the queen in the play would sleep with the horse. And then we hear about the empress, the Russian empress, Catherine the Great, sleeping with a horse. These things come through to us. We get these sort of little bits come through, and we don't know what they mean. Did she actually sleep with a horse? But it actually comes from a very old Greek myth. It's the story of the labyrinth, Theseus and the labyrinth, and the king is Minos, King Minos. And it's the story of the Minotaur in the center of the labyrinth. And at the beginning of that story, I won't go into it too much, but Queen Pasiphae, who is King Minos's wife, sleeps with a bull. And again, it's a wooden bull that she sleeps with. It's not like people are actually practicing bestiality, and it isn't to encourage bestiality.
Is it about the energy of the animal?
It's just a metaphor for the transmission of the sovereignty of the land. Okay. So they did it through an animal in that at that time. I'm talking about 4,000 years ago, probably something like that. So we find it in the Vedas, and we find it in the Greek myths. We find it in that myth. But we also do find it in Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare's play. It's almost like you have to know what you're looking for. And then when you know what you're looking for, you see it everywhere. But if you don't know it exists, you'll never see it.
At the beginning, when we were first talking, there was an important point you made about myth. Do you remember?
Yes, that it's not history. I think I was talking about our ancestors and how they lived and how they understood their existence. And they did understand this is now coming much more into the mainstream. I think you can even learn this in universities these days, in certain universities, that our ancestors were much more shamanic in their thinking. So they had this capacity to journey into the other dimensions, just like the shaman does today. It is actually built in. We've all got it. It's our birthright. Anyone can do it.
And when you refer to the word shamanic, what does that mean?
Shaman is someone who can journey into other dimensions to get guidance, healing, or information and bring it back to his tribe or community.
At will?
Yes, because he's been trained how to do it. But it is also our birthright. Anyone can do it, but you have to be trained. There are certain protocols, and particularly as we have come away from it, shamanism was driven underground, as I was saying, by the Roman emperors, in the 4th century. And it's been pretty much underground ever since. It's only starting to come up now. So people do need training now in how to access it. But once they've got it, then they're fine. They can just go. They don't need any further training. It just is, it's like riding a bike. Once you know how to ride a bike, you do. So it's kind of built into our software, but because we don't ever access it, we don't know it's there, we're not taught about it. I think deliberately, but you could argue about whether it's deliberate or whether it's just been forgotten. But it certainly does play into the current agenda that people aren't able to access it because they are feeling disempowered.
What is the role of the shaman?
Shamans have many, many different roles. Okay. I think your website, something about rainmakers.
Rainmaking? Yeah. It's Rainmaking Time and rainmaking.com.
Now, I don't know how to make rain, but I don't need to because I'm in England, so we're fine with that. If I could make sun, I'd be very popular. Make the sunshine, I'd be very popular.
Well, you know what? I use it as a multidimensional word between the spirit and matter. And it's a multidimensional space of bringing things through from the unseen to the seen.
Yes.
So it doesn't really matter what the focus is, in the sense is whether you're bringing in money, whether you're bringing people together, where you're bringing in a solution, whether you're packaging a product or a project, whatever it is that's needed and called upon, and the bringing it through, that's the rainmaking. To me, it's an ancient brand in the sense that it's always been there. It's not mine. You receive it by grace and not by force. Yeah. That's the deal.
You've just answered your own question. What does a shaman do? You work multidimensionally to bring through whatever's needed on different levels according to the community you're in, to the
commitment I've made.
Yeah. And I think some shamans are better at some things and some are better at other things. There are many things the shaman always used to do. One very important role of the shaman was the psychopomp. And that would be to carry the soul of the dead at death, to carry them to their next destination, which we call the realms of the dead, which is an incredibly beautiful place. I wish people knew how beautiful the realms of the dead are. I mean, it's just a wonderful, wonderful place. I love going there.
Talk to us about it. I don't think I'm the same kind of shaman as you.
Well, everybody's different. That's it.
I think my role's a little different, but go ahead, share what you like to or what you're able to.
If you want me to go into this one a bit more deeply.
Or whatever you like.
Yeah.
Just a little bit, because you said you like it so much, and I think the listener would probably be perplexed.
This is one of the problems of shamanism being driven underground. We no longer understand how to die. And yet we're dying from the moment we're born. So it's not like anyone's ever going to avoid it. It's built into the software. It's no one gets out of here alive.
Right.
You know, so we're taught so many things. We're taught how to live in the world. We're taught to drive. We're taught how to operate machinery. But there is now no one to teach us how to die, because the shamans have been banished from, shamanism has been banished from the collective consciousness. And that was a very important role of the shaman, that at the point of death, the shaman is at the deathbed. When the soul starts to rise up, as it does, it comes out from the mouth. It's like a spirit, and it comes out from the mouth. The shaman also goes into trance and starts to carry that soul. And it goes up, and there's like a membrane that opens, and you go up through that membrane. And then you're journeying. It's called journeying when you feel like you're just traveling. So we call it journeying in trance. And you go through several tunnels, and sometimes it's really beautiful psychedelic. Sometimes it's really black and dark. But black isn't bad. It's just black, Then you take them to... Well, here's my experience, and I think others have had a similar one that I've spoken to. You come to a river, and there's a ferryman, and the ferryman usually you can give the soul to the ferryman, and the ferryman takes him along the river. But I've also been the ferryman in one situation where I had to psychopomp my father, and I actually was the ferryman in this situation, and I took him along. So you go along the riverbank until you come to this amazingly beautiful forest.
This is literally... Or in the space, it's in the journey.
But
okay.
You're not making it up, you're seeing it.
Okay.
It's as real as you and I talking here now. But it's in another dimension. Wow. So you see this wonderful, wonderful forest, and it's huge. It's like the Amazonian rainforest, but it's even bigger. And my spirits told me the first time I went there, they said this is called the forest of despair, because just like the trees here take our carbon dioxide and turn it into oxygen, these trees take our despair and just heal the person. It's their food. So then the person obviously can get better just from traveling through this forest. The person gets better because all the despair is lifted off their shoulders.
Wow.
And then they're taken to different places according to what's needed. But it's very much, I wouldn't use the word hospital, because I don't think hospital is a very attractive place, especially these days.
How about a healing space, healing center?
If you ever went to a lovely healing oasis or a place like that, and where they're being prepared for their next life. I've never gone further than I can get them through the forest and to that space, and then I have to go back. So I think even the shaman's not allowed to know too much further after that. But I do understand that this place is where they're prepared for their next life. And it's just incredibly beautiful, and it's just all about pure, unconditional love.
Are you called upon a lot to do healing ceremonies, not only on the land, but with other souls before they pass?
I had in the past done a few of those, but I've been now in Glastonbury for 4 years, and I have a very definite mission here that takes up all my time. And that's the work that we have started doing recently with the birth of the radiant child, which we can talk about if you like.
Yes, please do.
So what I found when I got here was that, okay, so the shaman journeys into 3 worlds. There's the upper world, the middle world, and the lower world. That's our cosmology. The lower world is very kind of rural, and our power animal lives down there. And also the ancestors live down there. It's very much like Somerset, if you like. You know, it's quite leafy, and there are no roads or houses, and not that I've ever found anyway. And then the upper world is much more... Okay, so then you have your spirit guide in the lower world, which is usually an animal or a half animal, like a centaur. You know, those centaurs that you see half horse and half man. Then you journey to the upper world. The upper world is much lighter. It's much more crystalline. There's lots of glass and crystal buildings, palaces. And the spirit guides there are much more human or humanoid. They might be angels, or they might be purely human. And then there's the middle world. Now, I wasn't trained to journey into the middle world. I don't know. There's a reluctance by the shamans in the West, I have to say, if I'm being absolutely honest, to go into the middle world.
Are they afraid?
I think it's just they haven't been trained to do it. I hadn't been trained to do it when I got here. They know a little bit about it, but they tend to stick to the upper and lower world because it's what they know. And fine, because it does the job. If all you're doing is healings for people, for example, you can just stick to the upper and lower world, and you've got more than enough there to do what you need to do. When I came here, I started to get in touch with the spirits of the land, and it was very much clear to me that it was middle world work. And you know, I was quite reluctant because I just thought, I haven't been trained to do this, you know, and all the usual things, I'm not good enough and all that. But after a while of doing it, I've been doing it now for about 3 years. So again, with this kind of work, you often don't know what you're doing until you've done it. It's not like when you're training, if you train in physics or something, you know, you go to the class and you learn about physics and you learn about the elemental table, for example, and you learn about Bunsen burners and what they do. And then you go in the lab and you apply what you've learned. It seems to be backward in this work. You just have to trust and go along with what you think you need to do, and then you realize why you did it. And then afterwards it all comes in of what it was. All I knew was that I had to work with the land and work with the ley lines. So ley lines are kind of energy lines that run through the earth. If you've ever been to have acupuncture.
I have, and many of our listeners have.
Yeah, so it's a bit like the acupuncture of the earth. The lines are like the meridians of the earth, and the standing stones that you see are like acupuncture needles, and there are other things that they use along the ley lines, which were put there by the Druids, or people with a Druid knowledge of geomancy, it's called, knowledge of the earth. So the Michael line and the Mary line runs through here. I think that's the Christian gloss that was put on them. I think they would have originally been called something like the Lu line. Lu is the Celtic god of fire. And possibly Ceridwen or Bridget. I'm just thinking of Celtic goddesses that might be appropriate. But we'll stick with Michael and Mary because that's what they are called and have been called probably ever since Glastonbury Abbey was established here, almost 2,000 years ago. So we'll stick with that. So one is a male fire line. It's like a dragon, and it runs through quartz crystal. And that's the Michael line. That's the male Michael line. And it comes up from Cornwall, goes right across this part of the country, goes up to Avebury, which is a huge complex, which I must tell you about because a lot of Americans don't know about
Well,
it.
I had a geomancer on a little while ago, and he shared a little bit about it, but I want you to talk about it because I think you sharing about it is also going to be a different translation.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Yeah. So up through Avebury, and then along the country, and it comes out of the East Coast by Bury St Edmunds. If people want to come onto my blog, we can give them that, and then they can find information about it. They can see maps of it.
Sure.
How it all works. So that's the Michael line. And then the Mary line, she seems to dance around him all the way along. But she takes the form of rivers, springs, anything to do with water, wells, lots of wells. So these are the two ley lines, the fire line, the sun, fire, sun, Lu, the sun god. And then you've got water, which is the moon. So you've got the sun and the moon. And I'm also an alchemist. And in alchemy, there's something called the marriage of the sun and the moon. And this is what this is, the marriage of the sun and the moon, which creates life, which creates worlds. I understood that I had to start working with the land and clearing the ley lines, because our ancestors always used to clear energetically. They would clear the ley lines in the way that you would perhaps do space clearing with feng shui. So they would use chanting or bells or drums, and they'd walk along the ley lines, praying, giving ceremony. This is what the original pilgrimage was all about. It wasn't just getting from A to B, getting from one place to another holy place. It's actually about clearing the land, because the land is alive. The land is a spirit. The land feels our feet walking, even if you were to do nothing but just walk it. The land responds. They found, for example, labyrinths. Do you know about labyrinths?
I've heard of them, and I've seen one.
Yeah, so they will put a labyrinth in a desert, and people will just walk it, not with any particular spiritual way or with any intent. They will just walk it, and the water table comes along and positions itself under the labyrinth, and then they can make a well.
Wow. I didn't know that. Is that a secret?
It's only a secret because you don't get taught it in school. There's so much that's a secret because it's about empowerment of the human being, and it seems that the present regime doesn't want the human being to be empowered with
that's remarkable
real knowledge.
Exciting.
So if you're actually, even in just walking the Michael and Mary lines, you would be having an effect. But if you're actually doing it shamanically, working with the spirits of the land as you're coming along, going into trance, giving them offerings as well. Offerings are very important in this work with the spirits, all spirits, because you're giving an offering through the veil, and then they offer something back into your life, and you notice it quite quickly. So there is this kind of exchanges that go on. And so I started at the tip of Land's End, which I think a lot of your listeners will probably have heard of. It's right on the tip of Cornwall. And that was about, nearly 2 years ago. I didn't do it all in one go. I've done it in bits, sort of thing. So I've done it sometimes with people that I'm training shamanically. I'm usually just with one person. So I have usually a trainee with me. I have done it in groups as well, but I prefer to work with just a trainee and quietly. It's not ostentatious ceremony because I don't want anyone really to notice me, because it's you set up a reaction then with people. They want to know what you're doing, and they are going to react to it one way or the other. So it's better just to quietly just do it and not be noticed. So this is what I was doing for about nearly 2 years.
Some people feel pulled to a location and they don't know why.
Yeah.
Is that the land pulling them? Is that the spirits of that land pulling them? Is that a past life thing? What is it?
I'll tell you how it worked for me. I got pulled to be here. And I think a lot of people you'll meet here will say they got pulled to be here. And how it worked for me was, I had been here. I came here in 1970 for the first ever Glastonbury Festival, which was in 1971. And I was 6 months pregnant at the time. And there was a whole spiritual healing thing that went on, which I think is why I was pulled back here when I was. So that's another long story, so I won't go into that. But when I did come back here, I was staying in a B&B, which is kind of up the hill at the bottom of the tour. but still very high up. It's called Tore Down. And it looks right out over the Somerset Levels, which I've since discovered so much about in the work I've done with the spirits of the land. But I knew nothing about it. I just knew it was called the Somerset Levels. And I would just sit in my window I would usually I was in Kent, so I would get here, say, about 3-4 o'clock, get a cup of tea or something. And then I just sit in my window and I would sit there looking out at the levels until the sun went down. And I actually felt like I was in love. I felt like I had fallen in love with the land. And I had, actually.
Wow.
And they were in love with me. But at the time...
It's getting to be X-rated here in Glastonbury. No, I'm kidding.
I know, it's true. And at that time as well, I walked down the road and there were 2 trees looking at each other, completely in love with each other. They were just like, you know, when that first sort of da-dang you have with someone, like, not that I've had it for ages, but I seem to remember there is this kind of da-dang.
For sure.
Where you're like looking into each other's eyes and that's what these 2 trees were doing. And I just thought, God, this place is made of love. Well, of course, you see, everywhere is made of love, but it's just the reason it's more obvious around here in Glastonbury is because the ancestors kept it up for longer here. And so that's been gradually unfolding to me that is my destiny, to bring that back here, to bring back that relationship with the spirit of the land so that we can continue doing what our ancestors were doing all those years ago.
That's beautiful. Why is it, do you think, that it's a lot of times associated with ayahuasca and the taking of ayahuasca?
Well, it's about DMT. DMT is contained in ayahuasca, and DMT is a hallucinogenic. But we have natural DMT inside us, and the way that I teach people is not with any kind of drugs, although if people want to do it that way, that's fine. I have no problem with it. But it's just a different way because it's about accessing your own DMT, triggering off your own processes so that the DMT can come into your brain, the part of your brain it goes into, I think it's the hypothalamus, and then onto the pineal gland. And then it naturally opens the pineal gland. And then you can start to see much more multidimensionally. This is a natural thing. It's as I was saying before, this is all inbuilt in us. We've already got the software for it. But if you don't know how to do it that way, or you haven't been trained to do it that way, then you would go to I think it's mainly in South America, not even Mesoamerica, isn't it? They call it the Amazon area, where the shamans are there. I think they're called Naguals, the shamans down there. And they ingest it, the DMT. So you get this blast of DMT. I wouldn't recommend anyone to take it if they weren't in that situation, because I think those shamans really know what they're doing. They know about dosage. They know also they are working ceremonially with the spirits. So there is that protection set up around it. So I have no problem with what they're doing at all. But I still say, I think it's better to, if you know someone who can train you in that way, to have your own natural DMT.
It's kind of like the precursor.
Yeah.
You know, it's like in alternative supplements and all that. You a lot of times want to take the thing that creates the thing.
Yeah.
You know, you want to get to the causal level of it. So whatever it is that starts to drip the DMT, gets that to happen, that's what you want to activate.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But how much we're really supposed to have in terms of the volume of DMT flooding through our system, where it comes from. I know there was a movie which I did not see yet called The Spirit Molecule about DMT.
The name rings a bell. The name rings a bell.
It's an American writer and filmmaker.
I think I would have been put off by the title.
Right.
Like The Spirit Molecule. It's a bit like at the Hadron Collider where they're looking for the God particle. You know, it's kind of actually what you're actually looking for is a vibration, because everything comes from sound. So it's not actually a particle, or even it's much more energetic than that.
What, DMT?
No, the precursor.
Okay, the precursor. Okay.
Yeah. How most shamans do it, in fact, is through the beat of the drum. Well, this is what I was taught, and I always do it this way. Between 4 and 7 beats per second. Do you want me to demonstrate?
Sure.
Yeah. So it's between 4 and 7 per second. So it's something like that. But if you were to go, that would be be too stimulating. So it's about brain waves. And I think scientists call it, they have alpha waves and delta waves and
Theta
I think
waves
theta. And I think they think that the shaman goes into the theta wave state. But I didn't mention this in talking what I was doing in the past, but I was also a Reiki master, and we would work with theta waves as a Reiki master. People would go into the theta wave state, and I don't think that's where we go as shamans because it's very different. But that's just what science. I'm just saying what the science is saying.
I was told there was a sacred library here in Glastonbury that was either burned or pillaged or something. Kind of like Alexandria.
Yeah, that's the library in the Abbey. Yeah, but that was about the 11th century, I think. There's been 2 burnings of the Abbey. Well, actually, no, it's not 11th. So one was the 9th century and one was the 12th century. And then there was a sacking of the Abbey by Henry VIII when at the time of the dissolution of the monasteries. In about 15 something. I'm really rusty on dates.
No worries. I want to go back to your book. What are people buying this book to receive?
In the first part of the book, I make the case for it. And I think people need to read the first part of the book and not just jump to the second bit, which is part 2, which is the how-to bit.
Which is progressive. It's a progression.
I think, yeah, because one step builds on the other. Yeah, progression, that's the word. So part 2 is all about how you can do it yourself.
Do what?
How you can access that software inside of you to practice these shamanic sexual healing techniques, which actually are enlightening. It's about enlightenment, self-empowerment. It's about lighting up something called the Uraeus. I don't know if you've seen pictures of pharaohs like Tutankhamun. He has these 2 snakes coming out of his head. That was an indication in the ancient Egyptian times that somebody had got their Uraeus was alight. And it's about lighting up the higher brain centers, which you do through this way of sexual healing. You can do it with a partner or you can do it yourself.
What's coming into my mind as you speak, and I don't want to cut you off, I want you to continue to speak, is Tantra and Kundalini and the confusion of what is what. Can you describe what Tantra is, what Kundalini is, and if any of this relates to what you're describing?
It's similar, and I do describe in the book how it is similar but is different, and I explain exactly what it is.
Okay, great.
And why I prefer this way. But this is Egyptian, the way that I'm using, and it was given to me by my spirit guides, and in the usual way of them teaching it to me, and me not knowing what the hell was going on, and then finally getting a book which described everything that they just taught me. So this is Egyptian sex magic, they call it. But I want to be clear, it's not magic it's not like putting a spell on someone. It's not trying to get someone to fall in love with you that's not in love with you.
It's not trying to manipulate someone so that they sexually come to you.
Yeah.
Right.
There are ways of doing that, but I don't teach that.
Right.
So,
but why do they call it magic? I mean, there is a word. What is magic to you?
The root word of magic is mag, M-A-G, and that's it's actually a Persian word it comes from, and that just means spiritual power. So you've got the Magi who, in the story, came to visit Jesus, and they really were just shamans, people of magical power. So it's been very misused, magic. I think it's been the word has been demonized by Christianity.
Very much so. Very much so.
The message from them is, well, it doesn't exist. And if it does exist, it's evil.
But it's from the devil.
Yeah.
When I first began my rainmaking mission, people asked me what it was. I said, it's magic. But then I realized you can't say that. It's the art and science of delivery. It's the art and science of manifesting. Yeah. There is a kind of magic to it.
Absolutely.
And alchemy to it, even though I could not translate what alchemy is. I don't know. You would probably translate it perfectly.
Well, alchemy is just natural science. It's how nature works. Nature has its own processes. The difference between alchemy and science is that alchemy builds in the spiritual aspect. It recognizes the energetic component, whereas science ignores that and just deals with the material. And that's why science so often goes wrong, and why pharmaceutical drugs have so many side effects, because if they just took the herb in its natural state, there'd be far fewer, if any, side effects.
How can the world be assisted by shamanism and the kind that you're translating and bringing through?
There are lots of different shamans doing lots of different things at this time. So I really can't, I don't have the world plan, and I don't think any of us do. It is a very local work. We're taught to think in global terms because they want to bring in one world government, basically. So we're trained to think about saving the world peace. But really we can only fix things in our own backyard. And if everybody did that, the world would be a wonderful place. The spirits of the land are different wherever you go. They're not globalists, they're local. Just like certain flowers thrive in certain areas of the world. You wouldn't expect a desert flower to bloom here, or you wouldn't expect some of the flowers in my garden to bloom in the desert. It's the earth. I mean, there's a lot. I don't know if you get this in America, but we get a lot here of brainwashing about diversity. Everything's got to be diversity. You've got to make it diverse. You don't have to make it diverse. All you have to do is leave it alone. It is diverse. It is diverse. There is no two flowers the same, even though they might be similar. There are no two human beings in the whole history of human beings that have ever been the same. You get people that look similar. Even identical twins are different.
Different soul.
Yeah. So we tend to think, we've been trained to think collectively. And that if we think collectively, we're much more easily manipulated into different religions, and then they can control us from there. But I train people to think individually. I train people individually. I don't do workshops. I work with an individual individually. They'd come for a weekend and spend the weekend with me, and I work with them for who they are, which you can't do in a workshop. If you've got a workshop of 30 people, it's impossible. And so we achieve so much in just one weekend. Then they can go back wherever they are and start to work with the spirits of their own land and find their own, what they're meant to be doing, find their own destiny. Everybody has a destiny. I'm not someone special. Everyone has a destiny. I'm only special because I've found mine. And you find it by working with your spirit guides in the other dimensions and learning from them. But of course, you've got to be trained how to do that. And that's all I can do, all any shaman can do.
That would be great. I really appreciate your work. I have one last question for you, and we'll put this in. What does an initiation really mean?
That's a really great question. I'm glad you asked it. Let's talk about shamanic initiations. If someone was to come for a shamanic initiation, because initiation generally just means an introduction to something. And we go through initiations all through our lives as we become part of a new scheme or a new project. In terms of shamanic initiations, it's basically to get, the shaman is like a bridge between, I described earlier, the three worlds. So there's the upper world, middle world, and lower world. And there has to be a kind of bridge into those worlds for the new adept, let's call them the adept or the seeker, to cross the bridge into that next world. And it has to be via another shaman, because the shaman is already known to the spirits and trusted by the spirits, the spirits that he or she is working with. So they're a little bit old-fashioned in that way. They like people to be introduced to them. They don't want just people barging in. And so, which is, I think, the psychedelic way of doing it. I think in the 60s, where we were all taking psychedelic drugs and the Jefferson airplane and all of that, that kind of approach was a little bit like driving a rocket ship into those dimensions. And then when you get there, not really knowing, not having a guide, not knowing anybody. It's like turning up in a foreign country and you haven't even got a guidebook and you don't know anybody.
You mean like with me in England?
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to mention that. Well, you did at least know a few people, here. So you were okay. But if you hadn't even known those few people, it would have been very, very difficult. And the other thing is about teaching people how to interact with the entities in those dimensions, because they communicate in a very different way to how we communicate with each other. So the shaman, I spend some time, if it was me doing the initiation, I spend a good amount of that time talking to the adept and showing them, talking to them about different ways of what they may find when they get there and what how the spirits will be towards them, so that there's no misunderstanding when they get there and they can understand what is happening. Spirits often speak in rhyme, in poetry, because they're connected to that energetic way of communicating. It's an energetic, poetry is an energetic, and you'll often find shamans like myself, for instance, also poets, because you start to understand about the power of word, the power of intention, and then the power of rhyme is also very, like a sword. And so when I write poems, I can write a poem which is more powerful than a sword on a different level.
Poetry and storytelling can also be initiatory.
Storytelling as well, definitely. There are Ayurvedic medicine practitioners in India who will sometimes, instead of giving you a herbal remedy or a herbal tonic, will give you a story to read or tell you a story even. And that's the curative part of the treatment. There's also a book called Women Who Run with the Wolves.
Oh, yeah. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I met her. She's great.
Did you?
She, many years ago. God, many years ago.
I'd love to meet her. I love her book, and I've read it at different times in my life.
It's a great book.
It comes to me at different times when I need a certain healing on a certain level, because those stories those are the healing stories that were passed down through the grandmothers, and the elders, and they were meant for us to have at this time. So in the same way, poems, when they come from, if a poem is coming from the lower world or the underworld, if it has that as its root source, not all poems do. Some poems are complete sort of confections made up in the mental field, and that's fine, but they don't have that power. But if a shaman writes a poem where the inspiration is coming from the other worlds, it's almost like driving a sword from the other worlds into this one, and
there was an artist I represented many years ago named John Oberdorf, and when he would put paint to the canvas, when you looked at one of his paintings and he would do landscapes, surreal landscapes, you literally experienced being taken into the landscape. There's poetry like that. There's storytelling like that. There's the written word like that. That's not necessarily the story or poetry, but it's initiatory. So that's why I also wanted to ask what to use an initiation.
Yeah. The best stuff holds magical keys in the language, because, as I'm sure you know, the new science is discovering that everything comes from sound vibration. Sound vibration is at the heart of the atom. So if everything proceeds from sound, then it's different ways of using sound. And one of the ways of using sound is this language, that I'm at the moment vibrating certain atoms with these words in such a way that your ear is picking up this vibration and you can hear. But it's all vibration of atoms coming from the voice box. So that's certain words. In fact, that's why it says in John 1 that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Because the ultimate source of creation is that word, is that vibration. And the Indians call it Om. That's their primordial vibration, is the word that they use for it. So when you understand that a little bit more, you can start to use it. And then you would use certain words that hold certain magical keys that open up in the listener. A kind of, it is just actually opens up an opening within their I want to say DNA, but it's more than the DNA that's understood by scientists. But we do carry our race memory in our energy field, and the DNA is part of that. So in that race memory, we know these magical keys and these magical archetypes, and we know what they mean, even if we've forgotten for this lifetime. And most people have forgotten for this lifetime, and they've been very deliberately not taught it for this lifetime as well. Mm-hmm. So there's, it's not their fault that they don't know. But still the archetypes work. And I mean, advertising uses archetypes and symbols and all sorts of things, but they do it in a bad way. They do it to manipulate. But a true healer who is coming from the greatest good for all and harm to no one can also use those same symbols and same archetypes to open up in the listener, I don't know, to sort of open them up to searching for where they should be going next if they're stuck. And they won't even know that it's happening. It's not like they understand that that's happening.
It just starts happening.
But things start to happen in their lives. And, we were talking about the subconscious mind and the conscious mind.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the subconscious goes, which we're often not aware of, goes, oh, yes, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And it hears it. And then it attracts into the life things to happen that will get the seeker onto that path. So that's another kind of initiation. But the initiation I think you're most interested in is the one where the person is initiated into shamanic journeying, into how to journey into those other dimensions that the shaman visits, that the shaman goes into. And that's what I teach people to do. So I will teach them how to journey into the upper world, how to journey into the middle world, how to journey into the lower world. And I will initiate them in that. I will provide a bridge for them initially, so that when they go in initially with me as their, guide, then they can find their way through. After that, they're on their own, they're fine. They don't need me. It's not like in a religion where you need a priest to tell you what to do. Once you're in touch with the spirits, you never need anyone again to tell you what to do about anything, which is partly why it's been driven underground, because it's so self-empowering. It's massively self-empowering.
Thank you again.
You've been listening to me, Annie Dieu-Le-Veut. All my books are on Amazon, and if you'd like to support my work, I'm on Patreon as Shaman of Avalon.